corridors and the concept of the basic network. And the active transportation plan that's on the books speaks also to the basic network that is essentially to boost mode shift and to get people using the network. The basic network is what's required. So I guess I might clarify this motion to say, rather than just implement the active transportation plan, but implement the basic network outlined in the active transportation plan. So I think that might in part, sorry.
Before you continue on arguing, is this seconder amenable to that? So let's make that change then in the thing. So implement the basic network in the active transportation. Okay, thank you. I think that helps. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and appreciate your indulgence. I think that this speaks in part to your comments about, that there are many, many parts to achieving it. Not everything can be done in the next 5 years, and that's understood. This is really with the idea of making the basic network that can actually affect change in people's behavior and people's usage of the system. And also, I would hope, at least in part, addresses the comments by Councillor Watson in terms of if we understand where if we agree and understand where the basic network is, understand some of the connection needs along those particular corridors that are outlined, then we can move quicker to shovel-ready projects. We can understand how to build on, the small pieces that we already have, some work that's already underway, like the McNeil corridor. It doesn't do all of that, but it definitely does point us in the right direction of where that work would happen. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff, and with certainly a lot of understanding and appreciation that Mr. Robertson has not been with us for a long time, and he's on the hot seat right now. But it has been almost 2 years since, well, probably over 2 years now, since I brought forward a resolution to the previous council for an implementation strategy for asset management, and it's only been a couple of weeks since we actually came to a council decision on how we are going to achieve that with some of the staffing. So I know not a great deal of time has passed since that, but I am still hopeful that we are going to see perhaps a better insight into the asset management implementation strategy when we come to the financial part of the discussions this year. So I'm, fingers crossed that that's going to happen. And if we have a better understanding of the implementation strategy for certainly the infrastructure, then that, again, allows us to perhaps expedite some of the decisions about active transportation. But perhaps staff can comment on whether my expectations of the implementation strategy are reasonable.
I'm not sure, are you ready to answer that question now, Mr. Robertson? Mr. Payne? Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
I can add some context through your worship. So the comprehensive asset management plan, which is one of the backgrounders in here, part of that, there's many pieces to this, as council is already knows or is discovering, includes the consolidated capital plan, right? And that capital plan includes putting all these pieces together. And in order for that to happen, the programming staff need to be in place, which are currently being hired. So there's a lot of moving pieces to be able to make movement on any and all sorts of these pieces. Also included in the scope of that project would include a data management strategy. I'm tempted to go into the discussion forward with my background or with this, but I'll emphasize just one point, that the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan expects us to be achieving capital output to the tune of 36% of our entire infrastructure over the next 25 years, so the replacement of that. So it's extremely important for us to be able to plan it in a proactive way moving forward. And that's where the capital asset, the consolidated capital plan is really important. It doesn't mean there aren't low-hanging fruits that need to be implemented for other considerations, but to Councillor Patterson's question specifically, that is in consideration of the comprehensive asset management plan.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? Perhaps we can just bring it back up on screen again. For my clarification, if this motion passes, what I'm reading into this is that what we'll get back is some answers to what this will cost, what are the impacts on staff, how feasible it is, et cetera. So it's not, I think so I'm getting nods from the staff on that one. So I think that's essentially what's coming back to us. Do we have a time frame for what that, obviously there's money and budget and so forth, there's a timeline here, but not much in the way of budget. We've essentially set the budget pieces. So Mr. Payne, perhaps you can talk to the budget portion of it.
Your Worship, and I apologize if I should have provided additional context earlier on in the discussion. Council may note that there is a resolution on the books from fall for staff to come back in the 2023 financial plan to prepare an active transportation program based on increased levels of funding. And those levels of funding anticipated were from $200,000, which is the current program funding, to $1 million. And that question, how to achieve that gap funding, is something that will need to be posed to council at the time. So I just thought I would mention that as part of the context of this resolution. It sounds related, in my opinion.
Is there any comments or questions on the motion as it stands? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just wanted to also ask if there'd be a way of, coming back to us, addressing the fact that there are levels of funding available, grants and such, and I know that that's kind of often hard to anticipate whether you'll be successful in receiving those, but will the report be able to at least address the fact that this won't have to be 100% funded by OPE?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, through you, yes, precisely. That information will be available. The idea here is some options that would be presented to council would be: do you want us to use our current active transportation budget for design projects only, and therefore maximize the use of grants just with minimal district funding? Or do we want to proceed with active transportation construction using district funds and tax increases to do that, or both? And so that's precisely the question we look to be answered by council.
Thank you, but not tonight. Not tonight. Just in case anyone wants to go down that rabbit hole, no, not tonight. So we have a motion on the floor right now to have this options analysis come back with those pieces. That'll give us some of the answers, I think, that are being asked around this table. Is there other discussion on this? I don't hear any, so I'm going to call the question on this motion. And again, just for Councillor Green's clarity, I want to make sure she understands exactly what's on the screen. And the motion is that staff be directed to prepare an options analysis to modify Project Backgrounders 27 and 28 for clarification with financial implications to implement the active transportation plan, to implement the basic network of the active transportation plan over the next 5 years. It's a little wordy. Financial implications, just, to implement the basic network of, And read that again so we're clear. That the staff be directed to prepare an options analysis to modify Project Backgrounders 27 and 28 for clarification with financial implications to implement the basic network of the active transportation plan over the next 5 years. I think that's clear. Is there any other discussion? All right, I'll call the question on the amendment motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Look forward to seeing what that looks like coming back. Can we move on to the next item, which I believe is the 32? Is that right? Bus passes used for youth. This is brought forward as a motion for consideration. So this is essentially asking staff to go away and come back with options, what that would look like. Other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, this, through you, Mayor, this particular backgrounder didn't come back exactly as I was expecting, being that this had previously been costed and proposed to council coming out of the Climate Action Working Group, and I just wondered, was it an option to actually just put that proposal, in a sense, back on the table with a cross-check of cost rather than spending a lot of time studying it? Like, could we just do it.
At this point, it's, I think, asking staff to come back with some data on it, so that's the backgrounder that's in front of us. I would point out there may be some value in looking at this, of reaching out first to, I mean, it may be hard right now with the Regional Transit Commission or BC Transit and asking if they have any data on the impacts of it, because there's substantial cost, I can tell you, from the municipality's perspective, and of implementation, and so I think it may be helpful to have an understanding of what the value versus cost look at would be. If that's not the intention, if you wish to change it to bring it forward as an implementation, that would be a different backgrounder, in some ways simpler. Less that. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, maybe I'll hear what other councillors have to say around the table, but I would be willing to entertain a motion towards implementation, being that this essentially would have our youth learning for a lifetime to use public transportation, and it would get cars off the road, and it would meet our carbon goals. Thanks.
Is there any discussions? We have the background in front of us for things. Go ahead, Councillor Smart or Appleton. There's no motion, is there? No, there's no motion. It's just, no, we're just talking about the background as it sits in front of us. There's been one idea mooted. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. As pointed out, this was a recommendation that came out of the Community Climate Action Work Group, so I would just remind Council of that. And it has come to Council before for review. I think that there's been a certain degree of, there is certain costs associated with the program, there's a certain degree of success that's been associated with the program as well, you know, in neighboring municipalities with the rollout. So I'm also of the mind that essentially we move to, again, this is an active transportation, or this is a transportation mode shift priority, and something that can get people out of private cars. I think that's something that I've heard. My youngest is in this age bracket and has heard of, you know, basically all of his colleagues and his neighbors from Victoria are using theirs extensively, and he sort of stands out as not having one, essentially. I think it could be of great value, and so I would like to see us move towards funding the program at this stage of the game. Thank you.
I'm just going to point out we actually don't know what the costs are attached to it, so I think moving to funding it is a bit of a, maybe a bit of a, in this role, but if the desire is to have a backgrounder come back, well, that's sort of what the backgrounder says, is to come back with costs and so forth. So, but go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer to see the costing around this. I understand the logic behind providing bus passes to the youth, but I would really like to see what the costing is. I understand that. I think I'm trying to remember what City of Victoria, what the cost was there, but I also understand that there was a conversation around the CRD table that perhaps the CRD would be looking at a funding model for this as well. So I'd like to see the costs come back to us, and I'd like to see us explore if there's other possibilities, and as you said, reach out and get some data to see how well this works.
Thank you. I think at this point, there's no, the CRD. Now, there is a new transportation committee looking at transportation issues writ large for the region. To the best of my knowledge, at least through BC Transit, so I don't know about TransLink, City of Victoria is the only municipality that's currently undertaking this project. The province did, however, of course, move to make all children under the age of 12 or 12 and under free on BC Transit not long ago. So that's the current status of the pieces. But go ahead, Councillor. I'm going to go to first-time speakers first. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, and then go back to Councillor Smart.
Yes, Mayor, and I will echo Councillor Braithwaite's comments. I would like to see some costing come back on this, updated costing come back on this, and I would like to also hear the success, the pros and cons that for communities where it's been implemented. And, you know, the backgrounder that is provided in this shows that, you know, staff can do that. And so certainly for it to come forward to the financial discussions around priorities, I think it would be very useful to have that information. We all know what it happens when we come to the financial part of this piece. We add all of these things in, but I'm cautious about how much work we do in advance, because at the end of the day, we end up having to make some tough decisions, and unfortunately that means some things get cut. So I'm happy with it as it is, respecting the fact that it did come forward from the Climate Action Committee, and I think it's a good suggestion, but we'll have to learn to where to draw the line. So I'm happy supporting what is presented, what has been presented in the package by staff.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Through you, Mayor, could staff comment on the possibility of whether we can encapsulate this in the current budget in some fashion? Like I see 135 hours until the point where we just get a presentation to council, and then we wouldn't necessarily be looking at this till next year. I'm just wondering, since we have previous costing, is it possible to bring forward, an estimate of what this might cost for this budget? I'm just looking for options in which this isn't another year delay.
I'll look to staff on that one. Go ahead, Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, through the mayor. We've already done a little bit of reaching out to get usage numbers, costs, all those sorts of things. This wouldn't be an extensive study, I think, because others have done it, so we don't have to go and develop a model. I think it's just learning what others have done so we can give you some real data and an idea of what the usage would be within Oak Bay and therefore the cost. So I don't think it would take an awfully long time to pull that off.
I'm going to just throw in my experience because this has come before the Regional Transit Commission a number of times, and City of Victoria went through a number of different approaches to it. They looked at a UPass, and then they looked at buying the passes because that UPass approach didn't work very well. It created a number of new staff positions required at the city to manage the peak periods. It was not a simple implementation, and I don't think there's a lot outside of Victoria that have experience at this. So I think we can probably get data back reasonably quickly. I think this is a piece of it. But the implementation process will probably take some time as well, just for the education. I'm just putting it out there. I think it took over a year from the City of Victoria, from the time they started, to negotiate a contract with the Regional Transit or BC Transit to come up with a costing model and a model of how they could offload some of the cost of managing the program. So it had a lot of complexity to it. I don't want to set expectations here that we can make a decision, have it implemented. It took a fair bit of time within a much larger organization with better resources. So just want to throw that out there. The information coming back will inform, but all we could really do on that front, I think, would be to set aside some amount of money that we might guess at and have it in the budget if that was the will of council. So I don't want to make us be too negative on this one. I just want to express my experience watching it from the other side of the table. Hey, Councillor Green.
Do you mind if I jump in, Mayor?
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the comments around the table. I particularly appreciate your experience directly around this issue. Of course, I agree with this in principle, but I have to say I believe this is a regional, it should be a regional program. It should be jointly funded with the province. I think it's difficult for small municipalities like ours to fund these kinds of programs without help. And I think at this point in time, I would not be comfortable moving to implement when I don't really have all the evidence and data in front of me. So I am, like other colleagues, some other colleagues, I'm comfortable in leaving this one with staff to come back to us. And just a final point, one of the things I would love to see, in addition to this kind of transportation initiative, is also to discourage adult parents from driving children to and from school, for instance. I mean, that really, I also believe, is a huge issue. And so it's not just providing passes, it's re-educating behavior, I think, and shifting attitudes about driving children and young adults or teenagers to and from schools as well. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
I'm going to go. I think, Councillor Smart, you've been most advocate here. Do you wish to see if you're interested in making a motion to amend this in some way at this point?
Yes, I would. I'd like to make a motion I guess, to expedite the process of bringing some data back to council in order to potentially move this forward in the near future.
Currently in the 2023 years, there's something, is there a, I'm not sure. I'm going to turn to staff from a guidelines perspective here. These backgrounders, maybe I just ask, what is the timeline expected to come back with a report from council if this moves forward and approved at the budget level? Do we have any sense of that? I appreciate this is following an engineering department that is desperately short-staffed as well at the moment, so for all the work they have to do. Mr. Robertson?
Desperately short-staffed and desperately new as well. Yeah, I hate to nail a time to anything, but I don't think there's a lot of research to be done to this, so I think we could bring something back you know, by spring. I think we could bring something back that would have the information you're looking for.
I guess probably part of the question here would there be a possibility of bringing it back before the budget cycle is completed, which is May or end of April? Mr. Payne? I'm seeing lots of uncomfortable squirming from the staff on the timelines here, so you can give honest answers here, it's all good.
Your worship, I think budget deliberations really have to conclude by the middle of March. But the budget impacts of paying for free passes, I don't think that's too difficult to research that component. We could bring estimates in budget deliberations on a high level for that component. There's other implications that that this report would need to address, such as you know, staffing, privacy, all those sorts of things that could be addressed later. So if we want to have a decision to be included in the budget, we could bring back high level costing on free passes during budget deliberations in March.
Just wondering if the because I really think that's the bottom line, if we can maybe just amend this motion to just say, to include, to bring back high-level costing to the budget process. Would that be reasonable as a mechanism, just so we have that sort of, okay. Councillor Smart, is that sort of your intention here? So rather than an expedited implementation timeline, I think at this point deal with the staff be directed to bring high-level costing to be included in the budget deliberation process. High-level costing of implementation to the budget process. Is that? So just for my clarification on this, we're not going to have the research portion of this done, though. Is that correct by that time? There's no way. So it would just be a question of, at that point, does council wish to add a monetary piece in there to cover potential costs? Okay. So we probably wouldn't make decisions at that point, but give that option. Okay, thank you for that. Much appreciated. That's the motion on the floor. Is there other? It's moved and seconded. Thank you. So I'm just going to read this to you, Councillor Green, that staff be directed to provide high-level costing of implementation to the budget process on project backgrounder 32. Anything else? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
So I have a question. So is that just basically for the cost of the passes, or does that include all the staffing that's going to be needed to be able to to be able to implement that and things like that? I mean, that some of the things that Mr. Payne touched on, because it's one thing to have it's one thing to have the cost of the passes, but it's another thing to then have to consider all of the other things that have to be in place to be able to distribute those passes.
So, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Payne, Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, I think as we research it, we'll find out. Like I know people in other municipalities. So whatever we can gain experience-wise from them, I don't know how much I'll find out in time. I'm pretty sure we can do the basic, but how much about the rest? And then discussing with my colleagues about the impacts in their areas. So we'll do the best we can.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion to have that costing for the budgeting process? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just a question through you, Mayor. Do you need a sense of timeline? I'm trying to remember from the Climate Action Working Group if we had looked at a pilot project for just 4 or 6 months, and I just wondered, like, would you perhaps provide different options or presume it to be an amount of time? I just didn't know if you needed any direction on that.
I think if we just get a sense of the annual cost and hopefully some of the staff implications, that would be part of it. Any other discussion on this? I'm actually having a hard time supporting it, I have to say. And I say, so we have a backgrounder here. This was brought to council, it wasn't moved on. It's back again. I think what's being asked for now is a thoughtful look at this with time for staff to actually go and actually do some of that fulsome impact on council and so forth. I think what I'm witnessing in other jurisdictions, the chance of us getting this in time for the next school year pieces is very, very slim, especially given the staff components that we have. So I don't think there's any harm here in us following this process of going and getting the background of what this costs and what the implications are, and at that point considering whether or not we want to make it a priority amongst all the other pieces that we have. So I really struggle with this one because I get the urgency but it seems like we have a solution without having sort of defined the problem. And there's certainly merit to these kind of programs, but I would like to just understand what the implications are on staff, on costs, without the rush, because I feel like we're going to be potentially making a decision here in a rush that isn't necessary. So I'm having a hard time supporting the motion as it laid out. I think the original approach was actually a pretty appropriate one. And in fact, I sort of had in my mind, we may just be able to go and get some background information on the data and then come back and see if this motion is required as it is. So I'll see how I feel when I get to it, but that's sort of where I'm leaning right now, is that I'm struggling with this one to sort of jump the thoughtful approach to it, or the time incremental approach to it to get to the solution portion of it. All right, any other discussion on this motion as it stands? Don't see any, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? I have Councillor Patterson, Braithwaite, myself, Councillor Green.
I'm opposed.
Okay. So that amendment does not pass. The original motion still stands at this point. Is there any other amendments that people want to see put forward on it? Okay, so that's going to still go forward and bring back a report on it. It's just not moving the budgeting portion up. All right, we are moving on to the erosion prevention program for McNeil Bay. Are there any questions of staff on this one? I have one quick question for staff. I'm supportive of the motion as it sits there. I'm not sure if you can even answer this question right now, but there's sort of two parts of this. There's all kinds of work that can be done underwater, like doing artificial reefs and doing beach augmentation and those sorts of things. And those also take detailed design pieces and options and costing to come back. But it also talks about public engagement and input. And so I'm not entirely clear on the way it's written, if this is to move it forward to go do some of that detailed work and bring back those options for consideration, or if the consultation, public engagement piece is front end, and then based on the public engagement side of it, going out and doing the detailed engineering work. Do we have those answers right now? Mr. Robertson, and I appreciate this has not been top of your to-do list that's in your work so far.
Yeah, I have not been too involved in this one so far, so I'm not sure of the order of it. Sorry, I can't provide more clarity on that.
So I think at this point the lack of clarity works to our benefit. I'll just leave it, and I'm happy to share a little bit of some of the history and stuff of that offline. But I think the wording as it stands right now, if there was a hard this way or that way, then I might question that. But if it's still uncertain, I take that as fine, frankly, at this point. So Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And you're much more knowledgeable about this project than I am, but I suppose your comments confused me a little bit. When I read this and I looked at the footnote, this is just a top-up between the difference of what the budget was and what it needs to be. So this is just a top-up. It doesn't really change the plan or alter the plan at all. That's correct?
Yes, getting nods from staff. Okay. I don't see any other questions on this one, so I'm happy to move on to the other items on this one. What's next on the list? Okay. Okay, so initiate Uplands sewer separation. Pretty much a go at this point. Any questions? Not seeing any. Any questions, comments? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Can I just say on behalf of everybody how exciting it is to get it started? After how many years waiting to try and get
Yes.
to...
Exciting is
all-
always an interesting word for this sort of thing, but sure.
Well, I
It
think...
is very exciting.
I think that if I may, Your Worship, I think it is a good time to reflect on, essentially to feel positive about Council's foresight in setting aside a significant reserve in order to do this work, preparing and having our portion of funds ready so that we could apply for grants and reach out and do that type of work. So I think that the community would be well informed at this juncture to know that, the reason that we have the ability to implement this project is because the funds were set aside in the reserve in order to do the work. So it's that process of infrastructure renewal kind of coming to fruition. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate those words. I think it is, Mr. Robertson, you actually are arriving here at a point where we're all very excited about replacing sewer pipes, which is kind of a funny place to be. Moving on, we're going to finance and asset management. Again, this is sort of a continuation of ongoing work. Are there questions in terms of the this is numbers 25 and 38, in preparing a comprehensive asset management plan, undertaking municipal facilities planning with a sustainability lens? Are there questions with the way it's worded or with the framework or the scope of this work? Don't see a lot of people jumping on that one. Okay. Mr. Payne, you seem to have skipped a hazard there. We're on to Parks Rec. Is this our last section, the Parks, Recreation, and Culture? Oh, okay. First up, design Carnarvon Park building. So, Mr. Meikle, you're here on deck, but I think we're just going to turn to members of council here and see if there's any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
I just had a quick question through you, Mayor. I just wanted to know if the consultant fees on this project were all the way up to occupancy, or if the consultant fees were just imagined for a sort of schematic design phase.
Mr. Meikle? Or Mr. Payne? I see you guys looking back and forth. Mr. Payne, go ahead.
Through Your Worship, up to design.
Any further questions, Councillor Smart?
So sorry, like schematic design, or like building permit, just curious.
Mr. Payne?
Through Your Worship, so class B design, yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I just don't want to say I'm so excited about this. Thank you for having this on here and having this start this year.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I too am looking forward to seeing something happen in Carnarvon Park. But since this does speak to the building design, it also ties into the accessibility committee. So how will those two pieces fit together?
Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. I think, not sure the two will fit together. It depends, I guess, how quickly that committee is formed and up to speed. Because this will go through a consultation process, I would assume there will be consultation with a number of accessibility groups within the region. So we have listed on some stakeholder groups, several groups that are involved in recreation, accessibility projects, initiatives, etc.
You? And just so I'm clear on this process, because we get lots of questions about it, as laid out here, obviously there's been, with the changes to pickleball and so forth, there's going to be some changes and updates of the overall master plan, and then the building designed to match the revisions of that master plan. That's the order of business here, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that's correct.
Great, thank you very much. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. Okay, moving on to the next item, which is number 18. And this is options for a potential temporary off-leash dog park. Is there any questions of staff on this one? Something we need. Okay, and it's in 23-24. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just one question. Does the project as it stands have the flexibility to go after more than one location, following the Saanich model of going park by park to try out different parks? And the reason I ask that question is just if we are just choosing one park and after a year we find that the neighborhood doesn't find that successful, it doesn't really leave us with anything, as opposed to a model where we may try out a few parks and get a lot of feedback that would lead us to our future project of a policy.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Smart. I would assume and envision that that is certainly one of the options that would be brought forward. We've received a fair amount of feedback already, and so we would bring all of those options forward, and certainly that idea of a mobile or moving dog park situation would be likely one of those options.
All right, moving that forward.
May I ask a question, Mayor?
Please go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, sorry. I'm sorry, I can't see you, so it's hard to know when to jump in. Through you to Mr. Meikle. Mr. Meikle, I just wonder, are you aware of the proposal that was brought to Council a couple of weeks or 3 weeks ago around the use of Cochrane Park behind the hall as a fenced off-leash dog area? And I just wondered if that was part of, part of your consideration in this project. So that's just my question. Thank you very much.
Councillor Green, I'm just going to not have Mr. Meikle answer that one, just because I think at this point that will come back to us. But by singulating out one based on that thing, I think we might set expectations or raise questions about that one. I think it's obviously one of the many parks that we have and would be considered in the broader sense, but not, I don't want to highlight it in any way at this point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the only reason I raised it, and I appreciate that, you're right, was just wondering if it would be included as an option. I know there are varying opinions on the location and the suitability, but I just wondered if that would be in the mix. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to consider everything in the mix at this point and not exclude it, but not highlight it. Thank you for that. Is there other questions related to the dog park piece? So then moving to number 21, which is the expand opportunities for dry winter walking at Uplands Park. This has gone from the original ask to a more comprehensive look that addresses many of the concerns raised earlier by Mr. Sirois in terms of coming up with more of a master plan. Are there questions of Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. It's exactly that I wanted to ask. It is titled right now as opportunities to expand dry winter walking, but reading it and hearing about community interest, I thought it sounds like it's actually more like implement preservation and infrastructure. Well, I wrote down a whole bunch of his words. Sorry, hold on. It was kind of, this is actually broader than what the title suggests, because it is going to include a look at both infrastructure and all trails, not just necessarily winter trails. So perhaps maybe I'm asking for clarification from staff on that. Is that the anticipated scope, which it's not really just specifically dry winter walking, but more year-round use and preservation?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Watson. Yeah, staff would recommend this, a much more comprehensive approach here. As we're all aware, this is a very sensitive park on a number of fronts, sensitive from an ecological perspective as well as a cultural and an archaeological perspective. I think to mitigate risk and any potential pitfalls, it requires some significant planning to look at how we proceed in this park. Even the slightest change, my understanding would be the slightest change to any of the existing trailways could certainly cause changes in drainage and water flow, for example, that could significantly put some of the endangered plant species at risk as one example. So we are certainly recommending that step back to take a larger look at this.
And just a follow-up question, if I may, or you may have sort of answered it, but is there a way to prioritize or phase the work to save the most at-risk habitat? Like,
Mr. Meikle?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That would be our expectation, and part of what we took a look at here and actually included some budget amounts. We would certainly hope that there's some what you may call low-hanging fruit there, some trails that are more easily done and may have some lower potential impact or lower risk of other impact in other areas of the park that may be able to be done quickly. That's what we would look for a consultant to certainly inform us of. So there is some potential there for that.
Thank you. Are there other questions on this one? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you so much. And this is more of a semantics kind of a thing. I'm just wondering if we could perhaps change the project name to expand opportunities for dry winter access at Uplands Park rather than walking, because I think that was one of the things that Jacques talked about as well, is that access for those with disabilities as well. So it might just be a better word to use there, perhaps. And then also, I had something else, and it was really important. And now I can't remember what it was. So I will come back to you.
Happy to come back. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to, I'm through you to staff, I'm going to assume that there's no restrictions. There's obviously lots of moving parts to this and various different components. The budget requirement associated with it is, to be honest, a lot broader than what I originally conceived of for this particular item. So I'm going to assume that there's no obstacles as far as drawing out the work, like as far as this. Right now it's scheduled as a 3-year project. I'm assuming it could also be implemented over a 4-year time period or even longer potentially.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, certainly. It, again, depends on what comes back from that consultant's report, and I would look to that consultant to phase the work, as was mentioned by Councillor Watson, and really would depend on what the scope of that work looks like, and how much they're able to use existing infrastructure, for example. If we're talking full replacement or full build, or if it's perhaps it comes back as recommendations for full boardwalk trails in that park, certainly will take longer to implement than other potential options there. So it's a little unknown right now, but yeah, there certainly is a potential that it could stretch further than 3 years. I hope that answers that question. May not.
Thank you. Yep, I'll go back to you, Councillor Braithwaite, and then I'll go to Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I remembered. Sorry. I just wanted to clarify that when we talk Uplands Park, we're actually including Cattle Point as part of Uplands Park, just in case people aren't. Some people think there's a distinction between Uplands Park and Cattle Point, but it's actually Uplands Park. It's one. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smart? For the record, that was a nod from staff there to say yes. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Through you, Mayor, I guess just a question around, even in some of the correspondence we received, there was hints that, this may end up being a $500,000 project. We don't know where it's headed, obviously, and it's obviously a fantastic project that supports so many of council's priorities, but it is a large amount to approve at this point, not even knowing sort of where it's headed and what all the scopes are. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, do we commit ourselves to $220,000 to find out that it's $1 million project? And I'm just wondering about how it's structured. And this is I'm trying to think of what the actual question is here, but are we setting ourselves up in such a way that we can still leverage grants and private donations so that we can greatly assist with this project, but not put ourselves on the line for a project that we might not be able to resource?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. This really is focused on giving us that plan to move forward. So I would anticipate it very likely will come back with a larger request at some point to fully implement recommendations to preserve and protect both the cultural and the ecological elements of this park. So I would anticipate there would be more asks into the future. This piece is really about getting us to that point of saying, this is what needs to be done to preserve this park, again, on all those fronts for the future, and to create better access and keep it sustainable for the future. So really that focus around preservation. But yes, it will likely lead to what I would envision is a comprehensive plan for a trail network, accessibility options, and protection of certain areas of the park.
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, briefly, you wanted to.
I'm going to make a motion to extend the meeting until 10:30.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. We're almost done. I don't think it'll take us that long. I'm sure some of you in the audience have very sore bottoms at this point from sitting for so long. The motion's on the floor to extend. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? We will try and get through the rest of this quickly. Go ahead, Councillor Smart. I think, did you have anything else? Councillor Patterson. And then Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the comments that ultimately to build pathways could cost a lot more, and I have no doubt that that may in fact be the case. However, certainly discussions that I've had with a lot of the people that are always in the park is for, at minimum, to protect what we have, because I can certainly tell you that the degradation in Uplands Park has been substantial, and if we don't take at least basic remedial action, which this would allow for, and at least start with a remedial plan that could, over time, be changed out if we so desire, I think is critical. So I'm very supportive of this project going forward.
I just want to thank the three members of the audience that stuck it out this long.
I
So,
hope it wasn't me that drove them
We're
out. but-
almost done, but I appreciate it. It is a long time to sit in those seats. Okay, thank you for that. Before I go to Councillor Appleton for a second time, I just want to express, I guess I do appreciate that the approach taken to this. This was actually my thing bringing it forward, because I recognize and have multiple people comment on the fact that at the north and the south end, there's these short stretches, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet, where it's just impassable in the wintertime. You go in there with normal walking shoes and you can't get past because it's just and people end up climbing through all the bushes and doing a lot more damage. And so the question was really, can we provide some just temporary, wooden things that we lay down for the months of winter and pick them up again in the summer and kind of call it a day. I think this is a great approach. I'm happy to hear that there's consideration of, is there some short-term things we can do as well as some long-term, because I think there are some short-term things that we can do that would just make it a more pleasant and protected place than what we're doing right now. So I appreciate that approach. I just wanted to put that out there because that was sort of the original intent, and this has gone a long way from that, and I think it goes a long way towards a proper management of that park in perpetuity. But it's a sort of a new idea of tackling it now in our time frame. So I think that's part of the questions going here. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is a very challenging one, just because this is in effect my line of work, and I've done this type of work, as a career for a number of years. So it is not a pleasant place to be in, to be looking, critically at the number values associated with this, and having to make decisions based on other priorities for the district. There's no question that this work is needed, but I agree with your comments in terms of what I originally perceived as a short-term intervention was something a lot smaller scale than this. And does this work need to be done? Absolutely, it does. But I think this is actually I think it just should be called out in the open that it's just a very challenging budget ask in a time when we have a lot of budget constraints. This is going to be a very challenging one to balance off against some of the other things that we have to evaluate. So then that leads me to the question of, we are deciding at this point which things should go forward to budget. So as difficult as it is, if something is significantly outside of scope or sits very high on the budget that we're not really going to entertain at the budget juncture, during the budget deliberations, I think it behooves us to remove it or limit the scope at this stage of the game. So I would just ask your worship, maybe just to clarify with staff, if I refer to the financial impact on this backgrounder for this one, it does talk about consultant fees from about $80,000 to $100,000, archaeological review cost 20, and 20 to 100, ranged up to $100,000 for purchase of equipment, supplies, labor. So this does include an implementation component, not just a planning component. And so I would propose, and I would be interested in my colleagues' opinions, to, at this stage of the game, the plan, there is no comprehensive plan in front of council to decide on a way forward to implement these types of things. So I'm wondering whether or not there might be support to limit the backgrounder and the scope of work at this juncture to simply the planning piece, to get a scope of the assess the issue, to understand what the parameters are, to get a better read on the archaeological costs and those types of things, because those are likely to be extensive. So I don't want to set this item completely aside at this stage of the game, because I acknowledge the significance and the importance of doing the work. I think it would be challenging for me to review and ask that big as part of the financial plan process and sign off on that. So I want to be honest about what goes forward from this time. So I would be in support of making a motion to limit the scope of work to the consultant fees to research, consult, and develop the plan as laid out under this section, and just leave it at that for this budget cycle, Your Worship.
Before I get a seconder for that, I should probably procedurally allow for a seconder to happen.
Second, so we can discuss.
Okay, moved and seconded for that piece. I was just going to throw there early in the discussion that it's sort of something else. This conversation has happened, and I'm curious if it's possible, is to flip that around the other way and look at giving direction to undertake what we sort of original motion of this was just looking at, just for this coming winter, looking at temporary protection of those sort of entrance points, and move into 2020, and then look at that broader consultative piece and include direction to seek grants to see if we can get some additional funding for that piece. It's just such a massive piece of work that I think, and frankly, I think probably requires some consultation with First Nations and other pieces of those sort of pieces that may extend that quite a long time. That I think maybe we can do some low-hanging fruit. That'd be my preference, is that we consider, and I'm not sure if that's possible, Mr. Meikle, because I appreciate there's still some concerns here about, touching anything before we have a sort of more comprehensive. But are there some, above ground temporary things that we can put in that we can look at least and have that, and look at maybe seeking some grants for the bigger piece of it, which is obviously needed to guide the broader discussion. I'll turn it over to you. I don't want to propose something that isn't possible.
Thank you, Your Worship. I mean, I would assume and gather really anything is likely possible. I think staff are trying to highlight the potential risks. Again, placing something on top of the soil may likely be possible, but even that discussion of placing, gravel changes water flows and can have some impact. So we can certainly take a look at some of that. And again, I think some of our hesitation is digging into the ground bring some risks. And so just for council to be aware of those risks, I would understand, believe that you are. I might turn, and I know he's waited a little while on here. I would assume he's still on here. We've got Chris Hidley, our parks manager, as well here, may be able to address some of that. But my assumption would be certainly anything is possible, and we can take a look at some of those options that have low risk, low impact kind of ideas.
Right now, we have a motion to move that other part forward, so go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Your Worship, I appreciate your line of thinking, and I think that that's really the better deliverable at this stage of the game. I would like to see that happen, so I would withdraw the motion on the table.
And the mover and seconder have withdrawn that motion, so we're back without a motion right now. I think it's appropriate if Mr. Hidley is available. Mr. Hidley, is it something that we could, I guess probably not written in stone, but sort of direct some temporary measures be put in place for the upcoming, not this winter, but upcoming winter, or options be brought back for consideration? Do you see any, I hate putting you on the spot here, but something along the lines of putting, you know, on top of the soil raised boardwalk to get the feeding out of the mud for the access points where it's really getting trampled and people are walking into things? Is that a doable thing in your mind, or potentially doable, that we can come back with more information?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me first?
We can. You're kind of broken up, so perhaps just stay really close to your microphone.
Okay, I'll just turn it all the way up. It could be looked at, but I'll just to reinforce what Mr. Meikle said. Changing one area can lead to unintended consequences in another, and that's especially true for the rare and endangered plants. And the nature of the park and just the water flow in the park creates the ideal environment for so many of the plants that grow really in so few places in the world, and some only in Uplands Park. So that is our bigger concern. And from an archaeological perspective, really only one small part of the park has been studied. And there's more ongoing all the time, et cetera. So that's another concern there too. So yeah, I would just, I would be remiss if I wasn't being honest and saying that, you know, to change one area could lead to unintended consequences for other areas in the park.
Okay, and I think we heard that around the laying of gravel and so forth causing some concern. So I'll look to council on this one. I still think we should explore those options for temporary access paths. And if the report comes back and says it's not viable, then I think that's something to look at. But that's still my preference, is to move that part forward and then seek the other portions of this with grants and so forth going forward. But
Do you mind if I jump in?
please do, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I really appreciate this being so well laid out and comprehensively laid out. I think it was probably in 2012 when I first met with Mr. Sirois, both at McNeil Bay and at Uplands Park, to talk about the future of protecting these assets. And thank you to Councillor Braithwaite for clarifying that Cattle Point is also included in this work. I actually think that it would be worth looking at a comprehensive planning process. You know, I certainly agree that it's a huge project, and there may be ways of doing short-term, mid-term, and longer-term planning as we move forward. So, you know, a short-term plan that is maybe we may be able to fund a mid-term and then long-term. But I think the point is that my latest meeting with Mr. Sirois and members of the Community Association in late August at Cattle Point demonstrated how degraded these areas are, especially Cattle Point at that time of year. And we have talked a lot about protecting natural assets, and I think these two are very prominent in our community, as we know. So I'm very supportive of moving forward in some way. And, I'm not sure what that looks like financially at this point in time, but I also appreciate the input of Mr. Meikle and also Mr. Hidley, who knows this area inside out. So it has been, both areas have been topics of discussion for a very long time, and there is planning needed. I'm not too sure what that will look like going forward, but I think we have to do something there. So those are my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to think of any way of if the will of council is to look at something like this. It'd probably be as simple as, go ahead, Councillor Watson, go ahead, Watson, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just following up on Councillor Green's comments, I would say I'm more supportive of going big than taking an interim strategy, because I think I'm concerned that at some point there's nothing left to protect. You might end up with a nice rocky shore outcropping, but you've lost the very assets that you're heading out to protect. And given the each year that passes without a plan that moves forward to implementation just increases the risks that you actually basically pave paradise, or don't. You know what I'm saying? You lose paradise because you've been too slow to act. So I support the backgrounder as it's presented. Actually, that's just my thoughts.
Thank you. I have Councillor Appleton and then Councillor Smart. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I might propose the following motion. So I would move that the scope of the backgrounder, which is backgrounder 21, that the scope of backgrounder 21 be limited to establishing what temporary pedestrian interventions are possible that do not impact natural or archaeological values in the short term, and establishing costs with comprehensive management plan development.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Can you just read that aloud again so we have it correct on the...
Sure. So move that the scope of backgrounder number 21 be limited to establishing what temporary pedestrian interventions are possible that do not impact natural or archaeological values in the short term,
Short term. It's like typing on screen to make it really obvious.
and to establishing costs associated with comprehensive management plan development.
So I'm interpreting that essentially 2023 look at short-term interventions and then cost look at the longer term values. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly it, Your Worship. I really feel strongly, having some experience in this regard, that the initial planning phase for scoping of the issue, I think, is going to be really critical here. I think that the costs associated with things like archaeological reviews and those types of things could very well be very significant, far beyond what we initially project. And I don't say that with the idea of trying to delay or otherwise undermine the significance of the project, but in the sense that we are doing strategic planning for the purposes of budgeting. I don't want any of the members of the public or all the keen volunteers that put so much time and effort into this to misunderstand or to misunderstand what we can accomplish. I think that there is so much to do here that we need to balance against other priorities, and I think this gives us that initial planning phase to get a good scope of work and to really develop the next costing phase is super important at this stage of the game. This could very easily get way outside of scope. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you for sharing that experience. I'm going to read it aloud for Councillor Green's benefit because I think there's one worded error, I think so I think the word what has to come out of there, so I'm gonna read this as I think it should read, that the scope of Backgrounder 21 be limited to establishing temporary pedestrian interventions that do not impact natural or archaeological values in the short term, and to establishing costs associated with comprehensive management planning development. Ms. Mover and seconder are happy with that. Any other discussion on that wording? So this is a much smaller project this year than I think was written is in the Backgrounder at this point. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Any other discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Just clarification. Does that last clause, does it mean establishing costs costs for a comprehensive management plan, or is it? I'm not quite sure. It doesn't seem quite concrete enough to me.
Okay, I think appreciate your wording with develop. How about developing a comprehensive management plan? Is probably a better wording of that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, it was taking some language that was in there, but I think that's more clear if we with developing a comprehensive management plan. Beautiful. Action words at the beginning. Okay. I don't see any other discussion on that, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that wording, Councillor Appleton. Is there any other discussion on that? I think we've probably killed it. And we protected it. How's that? That's a better wording. Okay, can we scroll down to the next item on there? That's the, so we're just into strategic initiatives. I know, Ms. Bay, you saved yourself for the end here. Is that the?
We still have one more.
Oh, do we have one more?
22.
Oh, playground policies. Is there any discussion on that? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Smart, and then Braithwaite. Saw her hand first.
Just a quick question. Could the playground policy also include a discussion of the trends towards naturescape play spaces and playgrounds for all ages, just including in the scope?
Mr. Meikle, I think that's, as I understand it, this was originally initiated, it was sort of looking at some design options for things that would include those, but is that, does it need any motion to include that, or is that considered as part of the options that'll come forward?
No, thank you, Your Worship. I would assume those would be some of the options. What we'd envision here is essentially a document that provides those kind of guiding principles for how we move forward to replace playgrounds in the future. So what you've seen in best practices elsewhere is exactly those kinds of statements, those kinds of clauses, that accessibility, connections to nature, engagement, those things will be incorporated into that. So all of that would be we looked at for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. And just to, I seem to remember that in the last budget, we actually did put money aside. We've started putting more money aside for playground replacements. And then, so that's great. And then I just wanted to, I know there was some comments around Willows Beach Playground tonight from a member of the public. And I think I just want to say that I understand what they're talking about, but I think what we have to keep in mind is, especially at Willows, there's so much that goes along with trying to replace playground equipment there culturally. And if we dig, and Mr. Hydley would be able to talk to this as well, if we do any digging at all there, anything can happen, and it could end up costing us a lot more money, and we have to do it with consultation. So I think that would be something that the public should be aware of, that we can't just go willy-nilly and replace equipment at Willows. We have to do a little bit more consultation. So.
Go ahead, Mr. Meikle. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I think there's support for the motion as it stands, but go ahead.
No, just to add to Councillor Braithwaite's comments there, the Willows Playground is on the longer term plan for replacement, but it's at the farther end of that longer term plan for exactly those reasons.
Thank you. And I am very excited about this. I think we have an opportunity of actually really upping our games in the playground world. All right, moving on now. Oh, go ahead, Councillor.
Sorry, excuse me. I lost you. The line cut off, so I just got back in. So we finished the Uplands Park discussion then?
We're just wrapping up the playground discussion. There hasn't been
Oh, okay.
any direction of change at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Unless Councillor Appleton, did I see your hand pop up there on the playground? Okay, thank you. So now I believe we're at strategic initiatives, and there's two. Am I right on that? So first is the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations community input into Turkey Head, which is number 47. Thank you. I should just point that out for people looking for it. Are there any questions of staff on this one? I don't see any. I think we're just looking forward to the conversation. And then moving on to number 52, which is options analysis for the marina for the near term and long term. Are there questions on this one? Fair to say this is sort of the technical aspects in addition to the consultation piece that would help guide that. Don't see.
My only question would be timelines around so it would start this year then, undertaking option analyses for marine near term and long term, and it says 2023, so that's good then.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
correct, 2023. Any other discussion on that? I have to say how thankful I am we have a facilities person on staff now to be able to tackle some of these projects. So I don't see other questions on this one. So I think that concludes the pieces. Is that correct? I'm going to go. Yeah, we just have to get a few more attachments in terms of the other pieces. I'm just going to go back to those. So we have other already funded projects. That's attachment 5. I'm just going to do those writ large. Is there anything in attachment 5 that people want to remove from the already funded projects? These are sort of ones that are underway and be a moment to take a look up. Attachment 5 is on the thing. It is page somewhere around page 64 or 68 on the thing. So it's 6 items on there: fire master plan, deer management, stormwater management, cool kit program, GHG energy reductions in buildings, and the Sitchalmouth Willows shared knowledge planning project. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
I just had one. Sorry, I just had one question to staff on item. Oh, it's small. Hold on. Item 53, and if that work involves both public and private buildings. I wasn't entirely sure if it was public and private, or if it was just our municipal stock.
I'll go to Ms. Bay on that one. This is GHG and energy reduction in buildings program. It is part of the Community Climate Action Working Group report. Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, if you're ready to go. Oh, or I'll go to Mr. Bowl. I tend to go to staff if I can. If you can fill in any gaps, go ahead, Mr. Bowl.
Thank you, Mayor. We haven't started this project yet, so I can't give you a definitive answer. So I would appreciate any clarification from
Let's go
Councillor
to
Appleton.
Councillor Appleton and make sure that we're sort of all on the same page of this continuing to go forward. But go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Yeah, chairing it, and Councillor Smart was on the committee at that time. This was specifically targeted towards private buildings. The idea being that, because it specifically references a Community Climate Action Work Group, with the idea being that the Community Climate Action Working Group was discussing those initiatives that could be taken up by the community on the private side of things to complement the work that the district was already doing in association with municipal buildings. So this was really speaking to things like energy efficiency, retrofits, and those types of things for private buildings.
I think I realize the answer is in the very last word, which is incentives. So there we go. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I would just expand upon that. And like some of the discussion around that included things such as unbuilding demo permits and incentivizing that, low carbon housing policies and leadership levels of step code, things like that.
Councillor Watson, is there anything else? No. Councillor Smart, you had your hand up, or is that just to answer the question?
No, I just wanted to bring up the many letter writers that wrote in about the Dalhousie tree project, and just with regards to how that budget piece fits in, because I don't believe it is part of the 33 here, that it would be potentially a separate budget item that might come up at another time. And so I just wanted to clarify that piece since we're reviewing item number 33, and just an acknowledgement that that would not necessarily be included in that Cool Kit budget.
Yeah, that is correct. It's not included in the Cool Kit budget. Anything else on this page of the previously approved and continuing forward? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
If I could just follow up with the question then of the appropriate time, and whether that should be coming from council or whether staff will bring that to us.
It's a specific project on a specific street, that question?
That's correct. We just had quite a few letter writers, and I just felt like we should address how that's going to be dealt with in the future.
So I think questions that related to a specific project, I believe that actual is coming back next week as a piece. Is that correct, Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, and through you to rest of council, the Dalhousie tender project will be coming forward for an award next week. So the design of the roads has already been built into the tender documents and is largely not changeable. But I believe when we bring forward that report next week, if council has some questions about, opportunities to maybe do some plantings in boulevards, staff will have more information on that at that time.
Thank you. Any other discussion on our attachment 5? Not seeing any, so we can move on to attachment 6, which is the additional new. So this is basically just saying, yes, we want these to go forward for there's options analysis. Not yet done. So given these are fairly recent additions, unless there's been any change of heart, I think they're going to, correct it, they're going to go forward and come back with some costing and so forth. Okay. And then, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly, and I think earlier on, just to underline the comment that Mr. Graham made from the Friends of Bowker Creek earlier on in the session, it was a long time ago now. Just in conversations with those folks, I think council will recall that there was a very comprehensive and pretty compelling conceptual drawing included in the presentation that was made to council. It's quite a lot of expertise in that group of folks about sort of fleshing out the details of how that might look, and in conversations with them, they have offered, as Mr. Graham said, to help staff and assist staff with sort of further developing that vision. So I'm looking forward to that happening. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the future projects for listing. Is there anything on that long list that people want to move back into this list for this year? There's a lot I want to, but I'm not going to. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
I just want to make a quick comment, because I don't expect there to be support at the table for it, but being that we do not have the climate action plan coming forward as a project this year, and we have declared a climate emergency, I would hope that if we do have some new planning staff, that we might be able to grab some sustainability and environmental planning expertise.
Thank you. I don't see any other things being motioned to bring that forward, so I'm going to go on to attachment 8, and sort of a protocol for how we would add major projects. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
No, I don't have a question at all.
Well, you know what? This is not so critical. If people actually want a lot of discussion, this is more of a policy piece. Go ahead.
I noticed that I just wanted to ask staff, is there a contingency built into this? So say, for example, is there like a 3% staff availability to do very small projects on the go, or something like that?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. The amount available really varies by department, so it's very tough to give a fixed sum, and I think that's why the suggestion here is that council give the CAO the opportunity to report back on the implications. It doesn't mean always that the answer is going to be no. It could be in some cases, yes, we can do it for this department, we can't do it for this department. In some cases, it might be a matter of bringing forward suggestions for projects that could be moved around, or maybe bringing back a council resolution that had been approved and putting it back on the table and saying which would you prefer. So it really just gives the CAO the opportunity to provide suggestions for how council's desires could be fulfilled.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this tool, I think, has served council well over the last term or, term and change. I'm just wondering whether it might be appropriate as a council. When the original protocol was implemented, I think it's fair to say that not that we were in a different operational environment, but I think a lot of the exigencies that needed to be dealt with were of great import. Not that everything isn't important, but there were some significant things that needed to be acted on in very with that had significant resource implications. And so, not to say that we're in a vastly different situation now, but I was wondering whether or not it might be appropriate to potentially schedule a review and a discussion at the council table of this protocol, potentially around the midpoint of the term, to discuss whether or not it might need modernizing based on the current scope of business.
Can I ask that you extend the meeting for 5 minutes so we can have that conversation?
I apologize, Your Worship. I would move that we extend until 10:35.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you for the extra 5 minutes. So the question just is really, is there a process at which we could just flag this for it to come back for consideration in a couple of years? Ms. Williams, is that a motion required? Can we give direction?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think as a part of my performance review, which will be happening annually, and we will be meeting every 4 months to talk about how things are going, this can frame a part of that discussion throughout that process with respect to how is this working for us? Is it getting in the way? And it's just really a good conversation starter for when new items are brought forward to remind us of the protocols that we've agreed to on both sides, and recognizing that staff will always, go the extra mile to try to find a way to achieve what council wants. But this would form a part of those regular conversations. So I don't think we need a formal resolution to review it, but just a commitment to maybe bringing it to those meetings.
Thank you. Okay.
May I jump in, Kevin?
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the comments of both Councillor Appleton and Ms. Williams. I personally think an annual review of protocols like this or policies like this can be advantageous, and I think it also honors the fact that we have new council members that were not part of these earlier decisions, and so I also like the idea of including this in the review or the annual evaluation around the CAO. So I like Ms. Williams' suggestion, and I think an annual review is not a bad thing, honestly. And as with any tool, they may need updating or changing from time to time. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have an amended motion in front. Oh, we don't yet have any. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off a conversation about that one piece. So I'll give it. Okay. So with that, we have now the second recommendation, which is that and that and that and that and further that, which is part of the piece, now amended with a number of minor change or tweaks and changes to some of the specifics within that. I am not going to read it aloud. We are going to trust that staff have this down accurately as an amended motion. All the amendments have passed or been defeated as we've gone along. We now have a final amended motion, including all those pieces. So is there any other discussion on this motion as it's in front of us? No. Okay. I'm going to say one quick thing on this before it closes off, and that is just thank you for everybody. This is a really good discussion. It took us a long time, and it's hard, but I appreciate where we've ended up. I also just want to flag the fact that 90%, 95% of all the work is done is operational. And then there's always the big projects that get thrust upon us that we never expected, that we have to deal with as well. And these are the priorities that we have. And so this is in the context of all of that. I'm really appreciative of how thoughtful we are listening to the public and moving these ones forward. And just always keep in mind, the reason for that protocol in many ways is because that's the reality. We have to have some room there to deal with the unexpected. And I think we've done a fairly nice job at this point in terms of corralling that. So I just want to say appreciations and just a reminder to the public that anybody's watching anymore, I'm sure, but of that reality that we face as well. So not seeing any other comments, I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I gave a space there for Councillor Green to chime in. I take it she's in agreement. So that concludes.
I just wanted to thank, first of all, staff for their support in getting me here tonight, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be with all of you. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. With that, we just have the final couple of pieces of this. There's any new business, which I'm assuming there probably isn't at this point for a special meeting. And then a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Please no discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Again, presuming doesn't matter. Only one person can oppose it. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and your contribution.